In this video, we're going to show you to install wheel hubs on your Jeep Grand Cherokee located on your front steering knuckles. Using a 22mm socket, loosen and remove the lug nuts. Once you have the lug nuts removed, grab the wheel, remove it, and set it aside. Now to remove our brake caliper component here, there's going to be two slide pins we need to remove. There's one on the top here, and there's one on the bottom. Now, normally these would have the plastic cap covering the Allen bolt inside here, like the bottom does, but our top one is torn and the cap is missing. If you have the caps, just simply use a small pick. Go ahead, work that in there and pop that cap out. That's going to expose the Allen key on the inside. We want to use a number 11 Allen key on these here. Go ahead and spin that right out and do the same for the top. You want to be careful when removing both of these here. The caliper will be loose, however, the pads should be holding that in place. But you want to make sure that the caliper doesn't fall off. Now, it's not necessary that you remove the slide pins. They can stay inside the rubber sleeve if you want. We are going to remove ours, so we can go ahead and put a little bit of grease on those there. So remove that and set it aside. Now on our flex line right here, we have our ABS wire attached. We want to go ahead and remove the rubber points here from the retainer. Don't pull on the wires. You want to go ahead and compress the little clips here, push those in, and then pull that out by the rubber. Sometimes you can just use your fingers and pop that apart. You can use a pick sometimes to do that. And then pull this out here. Remember, don't pull on the wire. You can grab that rubber and just gently kind of twist that out of the retainer. Set that aside. On the outside of the brake caliper, we have this retainer right here. You can use a pry bar or a small screwdriver. I want to go ahead and dislodge the clips here. Use that pry bar and just kind of work that off there. I want to get and secure this caliper so it's not hanging on this flex hose here. Go ahead and grab the outboard brake pad. Now the inboard brake pad may be still there, but ours came off with the brake caliper itself. So be aware that you're going to have an inboard pad and an outboard pad. I want to go ahead and remove our brake caliper bracket. There are two bolts, 21mm, one up top, one on the bottom. You can use an impact wrench if you have one available. Go ahead and set that bolt aside. And when you remove the upper, you need to hold on to the caliper bracket because once you remove that, this is going to fall off and there's a possibility that rotor can fall off. So hold everything in place. Now there is another way you could do this. Simply put one lug nut on one of the wheel studs on the outside and that'll hold everything or hold the rotor in place, but it won't hold the caliper bracket in place. Take the bracket off. Go ahead and grab your brake rotor, slide that off, and set it aside. We have our ABS wire coming around to the backside and goes into our knuckle. Use a 10mm socket. Loosen and remove this bolt. Now the ABS sensor goes down inside the knuckle itself, and it could be roughly about an inch long when it goes down inside. Now you want to try and carefully remove this here. You can spray it down with some rust penetrant and kind of get this to wiggle a little bit. Go ahead and remove that sensor and set that aside. Using a 21mm socket, go ahead and loosen and remove your tie rod and nut. Set that aside. Now you want to go ahead and grab a hammer. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses when you're doing this here. You're going to go ahead and strike the knuckle. That should separate the tie rod end. Using a 27mm socket, loosen and remove the axle nut. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and use our jack. We're going to put it underneath our knuckle here. And we're going to raise our suspension all the way up. And we're going to lift this up into what we call the neutral ride height, which means if you had the wheel on this vehicle and it was off the jack on the ground, it would have the suspension completely compressed to a neutral ride height. So what you're going to focus on is the upper control arm. And you're going to continue to jack this up until the control arm no longer moves upward, but the vehicle starts to lift up. This shows us that the suspension is still compressing. The vehicle is now lifting and the control arm is no longer moving. We want to go ahead and loosen and remove this nut here for the upper ball joint. Before we remove this nut, use some sort of securing strap around the upper arm here, or the upper knuckle. The reason why you're doing this here is once this pops, if the control arm should go up any further, which it shouldn't, it might come up a little bit, you don't want this knuckle to pop out and hit you. Using a 21mm socket, loosen the nut. And what I'm going to do is loosen it to the point where the ball joint stud is flush with the head of the nut. Next, wearing safety glasses, use your hammer, strike the knuckle. This is now loose. Bring that nut down just a little bit more. We're going to remove our securing strap. Take that nut off completely now. Now at this point, we're going to slowly lower our jack. As this comes down, the knuckle should separate from the ball joint. Just watch for this here. The jack is completely released. The knuckle is free floating. Now what we want to pay attention to is you don't want this just to flop out. We have our CV axle in the middle here. You want to go ahead and push on this. Now our CV axle is free. You can push that through. If yours isn't free, go ahead and give the end of this here a couple of bonks with the hammer to go ahead and break the splines free from being stuck in the wheel hub. You can go ahead and tilt the knuckle out towards you, but you want the CV axle to work its way in. You want to go ahead and separate these two. Now the knuckle is free. You want to slowly bring this towards you, and you're going to push in on the CV axle. Now if your axle is stuck in here, go ahead and give it a few bonks on the end with your hammer. You want to break the splines free on the inside. Pull that axle out from the backside as far as you can, and then let it rest right there. Using an 18mm socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the nut on the lower portion of our sway bar end link. Once you have that nut off there, we want to go ahead and tap that through. The sway bar end link is under pressure or under tension with a suspension drop down. So if you use your jack and gently lift up on that control arm lightly, you should be able to pop that right out. So just continue to work this out, moving that control arm a little bit, and then work that sway bar end link out from the bottom. Now that we have our sway bar end link disconnected, the next thing we want to do before we lower our jack, let's go ahead and loosen and remove the bolt on the lower portion of our strut or clevis fork. Now on this side here, this is a 21mm. The nut side is a 23. Go ahead and loosen and remove that nut on the other side. I'm gonna go ahead and tap that bolt through. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower our jack just a little bit because that strut is under tension right now. Now at this point, you can see we have a lot more flexibility here with that lower control arm. Go ahead and push down on that control arm, on the control arm and knuckle. Work that axle up from the back side. On the back side of our knuckle, we have 3 15mm bolts. Loosen and remove those. We're going to use our hammer and work that wheel hub out of the knuckle. Watch your feet. If this drops out, it can hurt you. Wipe down where the wheel hub is going. I'm going to apply some anti-seize compound on the inside here, as well as around the face. Now we have our wheel hub here. You want to pay special attention to the back side. On the back here, there's an ABS tone ring and it's a magnetic pickup. You cannot touch that with any type of magnetic component such as a screwdriver, the metal backing plate, bolts, anything like that. You cannot touch it. It can ruin the magnetic pickup, and in turn, you're going to end up with an ABS light on the dash. Go ahead and line this up and start to work that into place. And once you have that in place, you want to go ahead and take the bracket on the back side. I went ahead and used a yellow crayon and marked what portion was to be up at 12 o'clock on the bracket. So you just set that in on the back side. And then go ahead and start your bolts one by one on the back side through the wheel hub. Now that we have all three bolts started, let's go ahead and tighten those down. Torque down the hub bolts to 78 foot-pounds. Next step, install the axle into the back side of the wheel hub. Now your vehicle probably had this shim on the wheel hub. Make sure that goes back on. Go ahead and lower down your jack. Make sure we can get the angle of the axle to fit in there. Work that around, spin the knuckle up and push it up into place. Go ahead and work that axle around a little bit. Get it to line up with the splines on the wheel hub, and then they'll just simply pop together. And they'll slide into place, and you'll see that CV axle shaft come through the front side. The next step we want to do is focus on our lower portion of the strut, or the clevis fork here. We want to go ahead and line up the fork with the holes in the control arm. And that might require you to go ahead and operate the jack up and down to try and get that to line up. We have our jack underneath, we have our axle coming through. I'm going to go ahead and jack this up so we can go ahead and mate the knuckle up onto the upper control arm ball joint. Be sure that you have the nut available to go ahead and install on that. Now we just want to get this started a few threads. Doesn't have to be tight. Let's go ahead and tighten the upper ball joint nut. Now, if you're performing any job here that requires you to remove the axle nut, you should be replacing the axle nut with a new one. Just for video purposes, we are reusing our original. Do not reuse the original if you're doing this task. Go ahead and get that started. You don't have to tighten it right now. We'll get to that later on. I'm going to use our jack here to go ahead and raise our suspension again a little bit. Go ahead and get your tie rod end in. Get that nut started, and then we'll go ahead and snug that down. I want to go ahead and install our sway bar end link here, but as you can see, the stud doesn't want to line up here. So use your jack, raise that up a little bit, and just manipulate that jack to get just the right angle where that sway bar end link pops in. Then go ahead and install the nut on the back side of it. and you'll tighten that down. Go ahead and snug that nut down. Torque to 85 foot-pounds. Install the nut on your lower strut or clevis fork. Now what we're going to do here, before we tighten that down, we want to go ahead and raise up our jack. And what we're going to do is, before we tighten and torque this down, we want to go ahead and raise the suspension into its neutral ride height, as if you had the wheel on the vehicle and the vehicle was on the ground. That is your neutral ride height. So go ahead and raise up the vehicle. And what you're looking for here is for the upper control arm to stop moving in the upward position and the entire vehicle starting to lift off of your jack stands. And there it is right there. Let's go ahead and tighten down the nut and bolt here. I have my wrench on the bolt head side. Torque down our lower strut bolt or clevis fork bolt to 173. In our case, the inward bolt is spinning. So we're going to put our wrench on that. Go ahead and lower our jack carefully. Go ahead and remove your jack. Torque our upper ball joint nut to 70 foot-pounds. Torque the outer tie rod end nut to 70 foot-pounds. Install your ABS speed sensor. Go ahead and get that bolt started. We gently want to snug that. Once you feel it bottom out, not even a full quarter turn, just make it snug. Go ahead and tighten down the axle nut. Now we're going to spray our surface with some anti-seize. If you have the brush on stuff, you can go ahead and put some on the surface. You can make a cardboard template so you don't get overspray everywhere. Install a brake rotor. And we're going to install a lug nut here to hold the rotor in place. Install your caliper bracket. Eventually we'll find the hole. Now with this still pivoting, what we're going to want to do is put a little bit of grease or silicone paste on the slides. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease there, and then up top. Don't get any on your rotor. At this point here, we can go ahead and get that lower bolt installed. I'm going to take our outboard pad, fit that into place, set it in. Now we can take our caliper with our pad installed, line this up, and slide this in. With this in place, we can install the 2 slide pins on the upper and lower portion of our caliper. Now we have our slide pin here. We put some grease on that. I want to go ahead and insert that, and we're going to start to thread that into our caliper bracket. Let's go ahead and do the same for the top. Now that we have these started, we'll go ahead and grab our ratchet and snug those down. And go ahead and snug down our caliper bracket bolts. Torque down our slide pin bolts to 41 foot-pounds. Torque down our caliper to knuckle bolts to 148 foot-pounds. Install the plastic plugs on the slide pin boots. I'm going to take our bracket here. I'm going to install this into the hole. Make sure that it's flush on both ends and it's locked into place. Get to remove the lug nut off of the rotor. Install the ABS wire. Push that into the retainer here. Push it into their little retainer clips. Press that little retaining tab into the back of the knuckle. Install 2 lug nuts. Thread those down as far as you can. And we're going to use our pry bar here to set here. And the pry bar is going to go ahead and lock that wheel and keep it from rotating. Now I want to torque down our axle nut to 229 foot-pounds. Now for video purposes, we reuse the axle nut. If you're doing this job, it is required to replace this axle nut. Very, very important. Remove the pry bar and your lug nuts. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle. Go ahead and install your wheel. Get our lug nuts all started by hand first. Once we have all these on, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Now we want to go ahead and torque down our lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Now, for any reason, if you feel a spongy brake pedal after doing this type of service, you want to go ahead and proceed to the brake bleeding process. Then at that point there, you can go for a road test. You're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.